They dismissed him as useless, a $2,000 mistake standing in the corner of a forgotten Iowa pasture. Farmhands chuckled as they walked past his stall. That one, they'd point at the huge gray shape barely lifting his head from the hay. He's got about as much get up and go as a broken-down tractor. But what they saw as laziness was something else entirely, something nobody in 3 states was prepared for. It was March of 2019 when Olly first stepped onto the auction block in Cedar Rapids. 19 hands of raw Percheron power, and not a single serious bid came. The auctioneer's voice cracked with frustration. "Folks, this is a registered draft horse." Silence, more silence. A farmer in the 3rd row muttered loud enough for everyone to hear, "You couldn't pay me to feed that thing, look at him." The gavel fell at $600, the lowest price for a horse his size in 17 years. Margaret Holloway wasn't looking for a project. The 63-year-old widow had come to the auction for chicken feed and nothing more. But something about the big grey horse in the corner stall stopped her in her tracks. Maybe it was the way he watched her, not with the desperate energy of a horse seeking rescue, but with a quiet, almost regal patience. "He's not lazy," she told her daughter on the phone that night, trailer already hitched. "He's waiting." The farm was small, 80 acres outside of Winteret that hadn't seen a working horse in 2 decades. That first morning, Margaret led Olly to the pasture gate and unclipped his laid. He didn't run, didn't buck or celebrate his freedom like she expected. He simply stood there, massive chest rising and falling, surveying the Iowa hills like a general studying a battlefield. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded and walked slowly, deliberately toward the highest point on the property as if claiming it. For 6 months nothing changed. Olly ate, he slept. He stood at his spot on the hill and watched the world pass by. Margaret's neighbors started to gossip. "She bought herself a very expensive lawn ornament," one said. "The local vet made 3 visits, each time finding nothing wrong. He's healthy as any horse I've seen, maybe healthier. His joints are perfect. His lungs are clear." That was the diagnosis everyone accepted, a beautiful, useless animal who had simply given up. But Margaret noticed something they didn't. Every evening when the sun began to drop, Olly would pace back and forth, muscles tensing, energy building like a coiled spring with nowhere to release. The accident happened in September. Margaret's grandson, Danny, was moving a stuck feed trailer by hand, 500 pounds of steel and grain wedged against the barn door. He'd been pushing for 10 minutes when he felt something warm at his shoulder. Olly had walked up behind him, unbidden. Before Danny could react, the horse lowered his massive head, pressed his chest against the trailer hitch and pushed. The trailer didn't just move, it shot forward as if it weighed nothing. Danny stood there covered in dust, watching Olly walk calmly back toward the pasture. They started small, a fallen oak branch blocking the driveway. Olly moved it in seconds. A neighbor's tractor stuck axle deep in spring mud. Olly pulled it free without breaking stride. Each time the same pattern emerged. He wouldn't respond to commands, wouldn't acknowledge anyone trying to direct him. But the moment he saw something that needed moving, something heavy, something stuck, something everyone else had given up on, those half-lidded eyes would snap open. And then came the power, raw, explosive, almost terrifying in its intensity. "It's like he's been saving it," Danny said one evening, watching Olly graze peacefully in the fading light. Margaret found the answer in a box she hadn't opened in 30 years, her late husband's things. Buried beneath tax records and faded letters was a photograph from 1987, taken at the Madison County Fair. And there, standing in the winner's circle of the heavyweight draft pull competition, was a dappled grey Percheron that could have been Olly's twin. She made some calls, pulled some records and discovered the truth. Olly wasn't just any Percheron. He was Iron Thunder's grandson. The bloodline of champions ran through his veins. He'd never been lazy. He'd been waiting for a challenge worthy of his heritage. Margaret's daughter, Karen, nearly dropped her coffee cup. "Mom, you're 63 years old." But Margaret had already made up her mind. The Iowa State Fair draft pull was 8 weeks away. The heavyweight division hadn't seen a new competitor in years. The same 3 farms had dominated for over a decade. Everyone said it was impossible. A $600 auction horse competing against champions worth $50,000 or more. But Margaret had seen Olly's eyes when he pushed that trailer. She knew what lived inside him. They didn't have a proper sled. They didn't have weighted blocks or a regulation track. What they had was an old hay wagon, a stretch of muddy pasture, and a 63-year-old woman who refused to quit. The first session was a disaster. Olly wouldn't move, wouldn't acknowledge the harness, the commands, the weight behind him. He just stood there, that familiar half-asleep expression on his face. Margaret sat down in the mud, exhausted and embarrassed. "I don't understand," she whispered. And then, as the sun began to set, that magic hour when Olly always came alive, his ears pricked forward, his muscles tensed, and without any command at all, he leaned into the harness and pulled the wagon through 200 feet of sucking mud like it was made of paper. It took 3 weeks to understand him. Olly didn't respond to traditional training. He didn't care about treats or praise or the sharp commands that worked on other horses. What he responded to was challenge. The heavier the load, the more engaged he became. The more impossible the task, the brighter his eyes would shine. Danny started calling it the switch. That moment when Olly would transform from a drowsy pasture ornament into something almost frightening in its power. They learned to trigger it, to build the weight gradually until they found the threshold where Olly decided something was worth his effort. And once that switch flipped, nothing could stop him. You can't keep secrets in small-town Iowa. By mid-July, rumors had spread across 3 counties. People started showing up at Margaret's farm uninvited, just to watch. The first time Olly pulled 12,000 pounds through 100 feet of wet clay, a farmer named Hutchkins dropped his cigarette in the mud and didn't even notice it burning his boot. "That's not possible," he kept saying. But it was, and it was only the beginning. Margaret's phone started ringing. Reporters, horse traders, competition officials who'd heard whispers and wanted to see for themselves. The sleepy Percheron that no one wanted was suddenly the most talked-about horse in the Midwest. Not everyone was impressed. At the Des Moines Draft Horse Association meeting, Margaret's entry application was met with laughter. "Lady, I've been competing for 22 years, said a man named Gary Clark, whose Belgians had won the state title 6 years running. He pushed her paperwork back across the table. "Do yourself a favor, stay home." Margaret picked up the application, smiled politely, and walked out without a word. That night she doubled Olly's training weight. He pulled it so hard the chain snapped. 3 weeks before the competition, everything fell apart. Olly came up lame during a training session, a mild strain in his left rear fetlock that shouldn't have been serious. But for a draft horse, timing was everything. The vet's orders were clear: complete rest, no training, no weight. Margaret watched Olly standing in his stall, that familiar drowsy expression back on his face. The fire in his eyes had dimmed. "We'll withdraw," Karen said gently. But as Margaret turned to leave, she heard something behind her. Olly was pacing back and forth, even injured, even confined. That restless energy refused to die. 2 weeks of the most careful management Margaret had ever attempted. Ice wraps, massage, controlled movement to keep his muscles from atrophying. And every evening, that same ritual. Olly at the fence line, watching the sun drop, pacing with barely contained power. 5 days before the competition, the vet returned. She watched Olly walk, watched him trot, ran her hands down his legs while he stood patient and still. "I don't understand it," she finally said. She looked at Margaret with something like wonder in her eyes. They arrived at the Iowa State Fairgrounds the evening before the competition. The parking area was full of massive custom trailers, gleaming trucks with farm logos painted on the doors, horses that cost more than Margaret's entire property. And then there was their rig, a 20-year-old pickup pulling a borrowed trailer, carrying a horse that $600 had deemed worthless. Gary Clark walked past with his team, didn't even acknowledge their presence. But as Margaret led Olly to his temporary stall, she noticed something. The other horses were restless, pacing, nickering, showing all the signs of pre-competition anxiety. Olly just stood there, calm as still water, that half-lidded gaze fixed on nothing, waiting like he'd been waiting his whole life. 12,000 people filled the grandstands. The heavyweight draft pull was the marquee event, the thing people came from 3 states to witness. Margaret could barely hold her coffee cup steady as she watched the first competitors take the track, the Hutchkins farm. 9,000 pounds pulled respectfully. The Belgians from Minnesota, 11,200, a new personal best. And then Gary Clark's team, 12,800 pounds, pulled clean across the line with power to spare. The crowd roared. Clark raised his fist to the stands, already celebrating. Margaret looked at Olly, his eyes were still half closed. "I hope you're in there somewhere," she whispered. They called his name over the speakers and it felt like a joke. "Holloway Farm pulling Olly," the crowd murmured. Someone laughed. Margaret led him to the starting position, hooked the chains to his harness and stepped back. The weight was set at 8,000 pounds, the standard starting point for the heavyweight division. The timer began, and for 5 long seconds, absolutely nothing happened. Olly stood motionless. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. "Come on," someone shouted. "Wake up, you useless," and then the switch flipped. Later, witnesses would struggle to describe it. The way his muscles seemed to double in size, the way his eyes snapped from drowsy to blazing in a single heartbeat, the way he leaned into that harness and the sled didn't just move, it flew. 8,000 pounds across the line in 4.2 seconds, a record pace, dead silence in the stands. They raised the weight, 9,000. Olly pulled it faster than the previous attempt, 10,000 faster still. At 11,000 pounds, horses began dropping out, chains snapping, muscles failing, animals that had trained their whole lives unable to match what this auction rescue was accomplishing. At 12,000, it was down to 2 competitors. Gary Clark's team and Olly. Clark went first. His team strained, hooves digging into earth, sweat foaming on their necks. They made it across barely. 13 feet in 60 seconds, a championship performance by any measure. And then Olly stepped to the line. Margaret didn't give any command. She'd learned by now that commands were useless. She just unclipped his lead, stepped back and watched. 13,000 pounds, more weight than any single horse had pulled at the Iowa State Fair in 47 years. The chain went taut. The crowd held its breath, and Olly became something else entirely. Not a horse anymore, but a force of nature. His hooves dug trenches in the packed earth. His muscles bulged until they looked ready to tear through his skin. That silver-white mane whipped in the wind he was creating. And the sled, that impossible weight that should have been anchored to the earth, began to move, inch by inch at first, then faster and faster, across the line in 11.8 seconds. The grandstand erupted. Grown men were crying. Margaret's knees buckled and Danny had to catch her before she hit the ground. The offers came before the dust had settled. $50,000, $100,000. One farm from Kentucky offered $250,000 and promised to make Olly the most famous draft horse in America. Margaret turned them all down. "He's not for sale," she told every single one. The story spread faster than anyone could control. News crews showed up at the farm. Magazines requested interviews. Someone even mentioned a documentary. But through it all, Olly remained exactly the same. Drowsy in the daylight, alive at dusk, completely uninterested in his own fame. Over the next 18 months, Olly competed 12 more times. He didn't always win. Sometimes the switch didn't flip, and he'd stand at the line like a statue while the crowd waited and wondered. But when he decided to pull, no one could touch him. He broke the heavyweight record in Wisconsin by 800 pounds. He shattered the Minnesota State Championship mark by a margin that officials had to verify 3 times before they believed it. 3 states, 3 record books, all rewritten by a horse that no one had wanted. Gary Clark came to visit the farm one autumn morning. He stood at the fence for a long time, just watching Olly graze in the pale sunlight. "I spent my whole life training horses," he finally said. He turned to Margaret with something vulnerable in his eyes. "How did you know that day at the auction?" Margaret thought about it for a long moment. "I didn't know what he could do," she said. "I just knew he wasn't what everyone said he was. Sometimes that's enough." These days, Olly spends most of his time exactly where he always did, standing on that hill, watching the Iowa sunrise, looking for all the world like the laziest horse in 3 counties. Margaret brings him apples every morning and tells him stories about his grandfather, the Great Iron Thunder. She doesn't enter him in competitions anymore. "He's earned his rest," she says. But every now and then, when a tractor gets stuck or a tree falls across the road, Danny will walk out to the pasture with a harness in his hands. And if the challenge is great enough, if the task is truly impossible, those half-lidded eyes will snap open one more time. The switch will flip, and for a few glorious moments, the greatest draft horse no one wanted will remind the world what power really looks like. Olly was never lazy. He was never broken or stupid or worthless. He was a champion waiting for someone to see him, waiting for a challenge worthy of his bloodline, waiting for a 63-year-old widow who walked into an auction for chicken feed and walked out with a legend. They say draft horses are measured by what they can pull, but maybe the real measure is something different. Maybe it's about the people who pull us out of the dark, who see the fire in us when everyone else just sees sleep, who stand in the mud beside us and whisper, "I know what you are." Olly was worth $600 the day Margaret bought him. Today, he's worth more than anyone could count. And if you ask her why, she'll tell you the same thing she told her daughter on that first night, trailer hitched and heart racing with something she couldn't quite name. He wasn't lazy, he was waiting. If this story touched something in you, be sure to hit that subscribe button and join our community. We share tales every week of animals who were overlooked, underestimated, and destined for greatness. Drop a comment below and tell us about a creature that ever surprised you. And if you know someone who needs a reminder that it's okay to wait for the right moment, share this video with them. Sometimes the most extraordinary spirits just need someone to believe in them. As never lazy, he was never broken or stupid or worthless. He was a champion waiting for someone to see him, waiting for a challenge worthy of his bloodline, waiting for a 63-year-old widow who walked into an auction for chicken feed and walked out with a legend. They say draft horses are measured by what they can pull, but maybe the real measure is something different. Maybe it's about the people who pull us out of the dark, who see the fire in us when everyone else just sees sleep, who stand in the mud beside us and whisper, "I know what you are." And I'm not giving up until you know it too. Olly was worth $600 the day Margaret bought him. Today, he's worth more than anyone could count. And if you ask her why, she'll tell you the same thing she told her daughter on that first night, trailer hitched and heart racing with something she couldn't quite name. He wasn't lazy, he was waiting. And sometimes, waiting is the bravest thing a soul can do. If this story touched something in you, be sure to hit that subscribe button and join our community. We share tales every week of animals who were overlooked, underestimated, and destined for greatness. Drop a comment below and tell us about a creature that ever surprised you. And if you know someone who needs a reminder that it's okay to wait for the right moment, share this video with them. Sometimes the most extraordinary spirits just need someone to believe in them.